Oh, wait, actually. There we are. Welcome to this latest edition of Executive Coaching Uncovered. Those of you expecting to see Joan O'Connor today, unfortunately, a dental emergency has arisen, and so I'm stepping into the breach. But I'm delighted to do that because obviously I've got a passionate interest in sport and a passionate interest in coaching. And today we're going to try to combine them with my two guests, Joe Ward and Rick Denton. So without further ado, would you like to introduce yourself? Joe, please start.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Joe Ward, as you can see, and I work for the Lawn Tennis Association, the LTA, where I'm head of education and qualification pathways, which means I look after the education for coaches in tennis and paddle and also competition officials. So those you see sat in the umpire's chair, for example, at the big tournaments or all tournaments, and the referees for tournaments as well. I'm a former professional tennis player, so I have a long background in tennis, and I would say I'm 3 years into a paddle addiction. So I'm very well immersed in both sports.
Thank you, Joe. Rick, introduce yourself, please.
Hi there, I'm Rick Denton. I have a 30-year career in financial services and have been CEO of a family office business before becoming a business and leadership coach with 1080. But also I have a huge interest in tennis and paddle and sports generally. I started my life as a tennis player and coach and worked in the US. I'm a tennis and paddle referee, and also I volunteer and I'm a counsellor for the LTA. The council is their governance body. So I'm also very involved in the development of tennis and paddle.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is a strong background in the sport of tennis and paddle tennis. I suppose what I'd like to know, or the audience would like to know, how did you get involved in coaching? Joe?
So, well, having played as a junior player and then as a pro player, I retired in the year 2000. And I actually went into coaching whilst I was working out what I wanted to do when I grew up, I suppose, and fell in love with coaching. So you have a lot of coaches within tennis and paddle who coach from tots to tour, and I did the opposite. So I coached from tour to tots. So my first couple of jobs in coaching were back on tour with people who had been fellow pro players at the time. And I didn't really want to continue to travel. That was one of the reasons why I retired, to be honest. So I then left the tour and started an academy with 4 fellow pro players who'd all sort of retired around the same time. And then just really got into coaching and that sort of love that developmental side of trying to help people develop their skills, learn new skills, embed the passion for the sport. I always felt like I would want to give back to tennis because tennis has given me everything I've ever had. I always say that tennis has provided every door I've ever walked through. So I've been coaching since the year 2000. And then paddle came along. We're quite late in the UK with paddle. Paddle's been a sport that has existed for circa 40 years across Spain and Argentina. It's been pretty prevalent in Northern Europe and the rest of Europe for at least the last 10 years. And I'd say we're probably 3 or 4 years into our journey. So I started to play paddle in order to do justice to my LTA role in terms of looking after the education of coaches, got hooked, and have since been playing paddle, competing in paddle, and I now also coach in paddle. So I offer clinics all over the country. Just started a little paddle program in a local club, and I'm fully loving trying to help paddle players go on that same journey I've been on for the last 3 years of just, again, acquiring new skills, etc. So, yeah, I absolutely love that feeling of euphoria when you can see something click, and that's the drug for me in coaching.
Thank you. That's really, really interesting. I'm going to ask you the same question, Rick, particularly given your business background. How come you got into coaching? But before you do, I'm certain there may be a number of people on this podcast who haven't even seen paddle or know what paddle is. So if you give it a brief description and then take us through your journey to becoming a coach.
Well, sure. Paddle tennis is also something I'm addicted to, because as you become a slightly older player and don't necessarily have the power, paddle is a great game because it's a doubles game. It's very strategic, and it's all about working out the different possibilities to pressure the opponents and find a way to win. It's a game which is played essentially with tennis rules, but on a court that is enclosed by a cage and walls. And the beauty of the sport is that you can both play off the ground, but also off the walls. So it acts as a hybrid for racket sports players and athletes generally. It appeals to badminton players who have the power of the smash, squash players who have the power and control of the walls, and tennis players who love to serve and volley, and all athletes who have quick feet. So that's paddle tennis.
Thank you.
How did I get involved in both? Well, probably through inspirational people. I was incredibly lucky in my tennis time to work in the States as a coach and work with Nick Boltieri, who was a very famous tennis coach. And also in business, when I was CEO of a family office, my task was to lead the business, but also to coach the future leader, who is the owner's son, who himself was an athlete and a silver medalist in the Olympics in Greco-Roman wrestling. So we had a similar mentality in many respects, and we learned a lot from each other. But those inspirational people made me really want to be an effective coach in both business and sport.
Thank you, Rick. Joe, if I can turn to you, can you tell us a little bit how the LTA is evolving its coaching and what frameworks they're developing?
Yeah, I've been in post for 5 years, and during that time, we've done a very thorough review of our coaching pathways. During that time, we inherited paddle, I suppose, and we already had 5 levels of coach qualifications in tennis, plus a 6th, which is the coach educator. And we basically have done a ground up approach where we went out to the industry first and foremost and asked coaches, asked deployers of coaches, asked operators, who are the people who own the businesses where coaches work, a whole series of questions around what they needed coaches to be able to do in order for them to run their businesses with excellence. And based on that very thorough insight piece, we started to, I guess, put the pathways together to ensure that anybody who qualified or graduated from an LTA qualification had all of the tools necessary to deliver with excellence in the industry. The result, as you can probably imagine, is the qualifications are all significantly more difficult now. They're more rigorous, they're more challenging. But we've done that unapologetically, because the role of a coach, and I imagine this is the same across any industry, the role of a coach is very difficult. You have to be an expert in what you coach. And in order to be an expert, you need to have gone through a very rigorous process, but both in terms of your experience you bring before you even qualify as a coach, but then all of your qualification and training on top of that. So we're now almost through the tennis pathway. So we've rewritten levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're now doing 5. And in paddle, we've started from nothing. So I always feel like in tennis, what I did was play a giant game of Jenga, which was dismantle everything without it falling down and then starting to put the pieces back in. Whereas in paddle, we started from nothing. So we're building from the ground up. And so we get to build with rigor from the beginning. I think one aside that is, I think, really important in why we've done this is I want to bring the respect back into coaching. I don't like the idea that people might see a coach in a club and someone that they haven't seen for many years and say, oh, you're still coaching then, as if it's not really a proper job. And actually you have to be an absolute expert in what you do in order to be able to teach someone else how to do it. I always tell people the qualifications, training and experience I've gone through to get to where I am is the equivalent of having a PhD in tennis, but we don't have the respect of people who call themselves Dr. Ward. So I think it's really important that in 10 years' time, with the rigor that we've introduced into the pathways, we'll also have brought the respect back. In terms of frameworks, we use frameworks a lot because I very much subscribe to the idea of, let me get this the right way around, teach a man to fish rather than give a man a fish. So I think via a framework, what you do is you're able to say, look, this is the matrix through which we see the game tactically, technically, psychologically, etc. Now you pull out what you're seeing. And so we teach coaches to fish via the frameworks. So it's an absolute constant throughout every level. And of course, those frameworks evolve from level 1 to 2, 2 to 3. And of course, by the time you get to 5, it's like you're reading the matrix. You have got that expert knowledge.
Yes, and that the various levels you said for tennis, you're applying the same methodology in paddle tennis, are you? So there'll be 5, 6 levels. Yeah.
So we have a level 2. We didn't start at level 1 because in tennis, a level 1 qualification is assistant. So you are qualified as a helper,
right? Which
would enable a coach to deliver lessons with a greater volume of players, or with, I guess, a more in-depth coaching, because the ratio of players to coaches is slightly decreased. So in paddle, we didn't have enough coaches to need assistants. Okay. So we started at level 2. We're now writing level 3, which will launch this year. And then we'll backfill level 1 when the industry's ready for it.
Okay. And in the tennis framework, how long or how many hours would it take someone to gravitate through those various grades, getting to, I think you said the top one would be coach educator?
Yeah, so assistant is 2 days plus around another day of coursework. That's level 1. By the time you get to level 5, you're looking at a 2-year course. So the amount of qualifications and training significantly increases as you go through the pathway. To become a coach educator, you need to be a minimum level 4 to apply. You might not be successful in your application for the course. If you get on the course, then you're looking at between 6 months and a year, plus so much qualification experience where you have to video yourself delivering to show that you've got the knowledge and skills, but also the course delivery knowledge and skills.
Gosh, that's very extensive. Rick, if I can turn to you then, as a coach of coaches, how do you collaborate with other coaches to support development of individual players or teams?
Well, perhaps just before answering that question, Michael, I'd say something about Jo's comments about how she is and has developed herself as a coach and how she manages. The business coaching world is also relatively new as a profession. And actually, those of us who work in 1080 and other coaching fields all have to be professionally qualified. We all have to also demonstrate a huge experience. Otherwise, I don't think we have credibility with our coaching candidates. And in actual fact, we often do a mixture of coaching and mentoring, actually giving our own experiences and showing the way for some of our candidates. And that requires you to have had a deep knowledge of an industry or a profession, or indeed life experiences. So it's very similar, I think, to the sports world in the preparation you need. Now, how about collaborating with other coaches?
And before you go on to that, Rick, I think it's a really important point you raised, because I think there's a big debate within business coaching as to whether or not you have to have the necessary experience or knowledge of where the client works or the environment. And there's very two distinct trends around that. So no, I can take my coaching skills irrespective of a business environment. Or the other way is, no, you need to have been there, seen it, worn the T-shirt, as well as the coaching. Just push you. Where do you sit on that debate?
Yeah, well, as a more mature candidate, I probably sit on the side of experience is helpful. But actually, there's always room for fresh thinking. And I do think that, some of the younger candidates will identify more with somebody who's younger, with
Yeah.
very similar outlook to life. So, for example, if we look at Djokovic now, he's chosen a coach in Andy Murray who has a very similar playing experience. He knows as a friend, is more or less the same age, and is bringing almost a mini me into the framework to help him. And he's done that for a particular reason, because he sees certain qualities in Andy Murray that he needs right now, particularly that mental and physical resilience as he becomes more mature. And he wants somebody who really understands his position. So that's where, both models can work very, very effectively, if that helps.
So turning to the question about coaches of coaches.
I thought you might want me to answer the question. But yes, in terms of working with other coaches and collaboration, I do actually view that coaching can be a team delivery. If I don't see the skills myself in what I do, I would call upon an expert other to come in and give a different framing to the problem. And also you collaborate in different ways because you need resources. And what I think is very powerful is that if you take, for example, our own 1080 model, Michael, all our coaches contribute materials, articles, reference points, intellectual pieces, knowledge, which we can bring together very easily for our coaching candidates. So our coaches have collaborated to create a resource bank, which is a more powerful equation than any one person's ideas. I also think that the team approach can give a fresh perspective. I've worked with some of my coachees for years, and sometimes I think they just need a fresh perspective on this. Let's give them a completely different view and see if it stimulates their thinking. So for me, it's all about a mix of skills and collaboration to bring something better to the coachee.
Okay. Joe, can I ask you the same question in terms of collaboration with the coaches?
I think everything Rick said resonates. The thing I would add is that in tennis coaching and paddle coaching, it can be quite lonely. And yeah, I said earlier that I started an academy program with 4 friends and colleagues who'd played pro tennis at the same time as me. And whilst we'd all be coaching at the same time and we'd all only be 1 court apart, it was quite isolating to be locked into that moment with the players in front of me. And now in paddle, I'm inside a glass box. So I think the collaboration is really important. I think it's important for your learners because, as Rick said, you do get a different voice. And I've had experiences where one of my colleagues has come on court and said exactly the same thing in a slightly different accent, and it's just landed like that. And I'm both relieved and actually a little bit annoyed at the same time because it's exactly what I'd said.
Yeah.
But I think it's also good for the coaches, for ourselves, for our own health and for our own mental health, to have the hive mind sometimes, to have the support of the people around you. I think, I don't know how it is in the business world, but in the sports world, coaching's exhausting. And I often liken it to, there's coaches out there who are doing like a 40-hour week. For me, I'd never done that because I've got a significant knee injury. So for me, a full-time week would have been maybe 25 hours, but that's still exhausting to be front of house for 25 hours with someone who is desperate to get better and you want to give them your gold standard service. So I often say it's like being a chef. Nobody wants a bad meal. Every time they come to a restaurant, they want your best meal from you. And so I feel like you're constantly delivering and performing, and it is really exhausting. So having your colleagues to go and have a meeting with afterwards, or even, dare I say it, go for a glass of wine and blow off some steam, I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. And just picking up on that really important point about the sort of loneliness and the pressure on the coach. I mean, as a business coach, you pick up all the problems of your candidates. You take them on your shoulders, and I worry about them every single day. And so you do have that sort of pressure built on yourself to help them with their problems. And something we really encourage in the business and leadership coaching world is to have partners that we can discuss these issues with, so you can almost sort of offload some of those thoughts and those issues and get their own help on how you reframe those problems. Because otherwise, it's all on your shoulders, and that can be a very serious issue when somebody's facing a personal or business crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go on, Joe.
One more thing. We run we run annual coach forums via the LTA through our Coach Development Centre network. And last year, we always have an on-court and an off-court component. Last year, the off-court component was around mental health. And I was really nervous about delivering it because I just imagined that you had all of these sort of thick-skinned coaches out there. We've got a very, very much a predominantly male workforce, and I didn't think they'd want to talk. And it was probably one of the best things we've ever done. We just started a conversation and everybody opened up. And of course, we're all going through the same issues. You know, anything you hear me say about coaching, anything positive or negative, they're all experiencing it the same. And I can't tell you what a success it was. It was actually like, it was really uplifting to see coaches who'd been doing it for 20, 25 years, all suddenly opening up and sharing ideas and problem solving solutions with each other.
Okay, so Joe, I'm going to stick with you. Turning to you again, the biggest influence in your coaching career, who are you going to cite? And how have they shaped that approach?
I think the biggest influences in my coaching career will, of course, be the coaches that I've had, both good and bad. I think I've had probably 3 or 4 main coaches throughout my career, and one I can think of who was very inspirational. Whatever he'd done, he'd have been the leader. If he'd been a politician, he'd have been prime minister. He was just a very inspirational man. And I always felt like he had a way of sort of selling anything that needed to be done. You know, he was just very he was just very persuasive, very charismatic, very, very, I don't know, very insightful man, very, very good at tennis. And actually, unfortunately, he passed away last year. I think I've also learned a lot, though, from the coaches who I wouldn't speak so positively about, who probably weren't so giving in their coaching and weren't in it for the same reasons, with the same passion for the sport or the same love of it. And they very much influenced all of the behaviours I wouldn't exhibit in a million years, and certainly would avoid writing into any of the pathways that we're developing with the LTA, because our job as coaches is to grow the games via inspirational coaching, and passion for the games has to be at your core, and your ability to communicate that passion needs to be instrumental in what you do. So the biggest influences have been both positive and negative with the people around me.
And I think that's very true in business. You clearly remember good bosses you work for, but equally you learn the lessons of bad bosses. Hopefully you don't spend too much time with the bad bosses. Rick, what about your greatest influence?
Yeah, it's a tough question because I've been lucky enough to meet some very inspirational people, but the one I would single out in the coaching world and business was somebody I met in MIT, who was a professor there, but also an academic and a business psychologist, called Ed Schein. And Ed Schein has written a number of books on the topic,
Yes.
but he's probably best known for Career Anchors, which is all about understanding what drives your success in your career. And also he had a philosophy which I thought was so simple but so effective, which he called checking in. And the simple premise was, until you understood the person and the perspective and where they were right at that moment, you couldn't really effectively build a partnership and move forward. So it was all about the personal understanding. Understand the person across the table from you, and then you can relate, communicate, and build effectively together, which I thought was just a simple but great way of viewing almost every situation.
That's a great lead in to the next question, which is how you motivate your coachees. Joe, how do you motivate and inspire your coachees?
I think I'm not sure I try. I think I just walk on court with my passion, and more often than not, they bring their passion. And then when you have that collision of passions, great things happen. I don't think it's my job actually to motivate the players I coach. I think sometimes you've got to, if someone's having a rubbish day or if someone's really tired, of course, then you're going to have to give them a little spark. But I can't give someone a passion for tennis or a passion for paddle they don't already come to the court with.
Yeah.
And actually, if they don't have the passion that mirrors mine, we're probably not a good mix. You know, if they're not there for the reasons that, like, to develop or to gain skill or to see what doors paddle or tennis opens for them, I don't see. I think the reason why I think like that is because I think the greatest talent you can have as an athlete is obsession or passion. I think they're probably the same sort of thing, but obsession's probably just taken it a little bit further.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that came very naturally to me in tennis. The only reason I became a professional tennis player was because I was obsessed. And I would have moved heaven and earth to get on court. I would have moved heaven and earth to play that extra hour, get my racket on one extra ball. And so if somebody doesn't have that, I don't know how much I can really help them if I have to fight to embed that in them.
Okay. And I think it's fairly obvious, I think, from the world of coaching in sport, that it's a passion and obsession to get better. Rick, I ask the same question of you, but you must have been there when you've had those clients who've been sent to you, I've been sent for you for coaching, who aren't coming on to the arena with a passion. Indeed, exactly the opposite.
No, often in coaching, in business coaching, you pick people up at the pivot moment of their careers, a time when they're at their lowest, when they need to face and manage change, and they're facing very tough circumstances. So for me, motivating, inspiring, and supporting them from the moment I'm with my coachee, they're the center of my world, and their problems are the center of my world. I'm absolutely alongside them to help them deliver what they want to do. I really build a rapport and understanding, sometimes with, tools which help us, such as a psychometric, to really understand what makes them tick and what motivates them. Sometimes by just some simple questioning on strengths and weaknesses, but really understanding what their objectives are, so that I and they are absolutely motivated to achieve the same thing. And I think it's that factor of having somebody who really is on their side and has some skills to help them that can be really motivating and deliver something for them. And that to me is motivational for both of us.
Okay. I'm very conscious of time, but I want to get two more final questions in if I can. And the next one is about high tension, high stress moments. I mean, obviously in sport, there are critical times during the game. How do you coach players to manage that? Dare I say, you do see those players who double fault exactly at the wrong moment. Can you coach people to manage high stress situations?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I think this is double-edged for me. I think you recreate the high stress situations in a practice environment. And of course you can, to a certain extent. You can certainly mimic what stress does to your body. So you can, we know when we're stressed that your heart beats faster, your breathing becomes a little bit ragged. So it's so easy to recreate those two things, for example, in a practice court setting. Not sure if it's true, but they say that Tiger Woods never finished a golf training session until he'd putted 100 6-foot putts, and if he missed one, he started again. That's a way of recreating your own pressure within a practice environment. But I think at the other end of that spectrum, you need to demystify the pressure in a match setting, because it's not all real. And I would, for example, I was fortunate to play Wimbledon a few times, and I always had like a little internal coping mechanism where wherever I'm serving on whichever court in the world, I always bounce the ball 2 times. And I would look down and all I would see is the earth, my foot, my shoe, and I'd bounce the ball a couple of times. And doing that on court at Wimbledon, it's exactly the same. I'm just demystifying the difficulty. The process is the same. It doesn't matter that I'm on a different blade of grass to having doing it in the park somewhere. And I think you need to do as much as you can in dress rehearsal to demystify all of those situations so they just feel normal. Like the best players in the world have normalized the most extreme circumstances. And that's what we need to try and help them to do as coaches.
Okay. Rick, in finance, I'm sure you've seen it where you see leaders under very high stress because of the results which they're trying to manage. Again, any tips that you can give to help people, manage people who are living in that sort of fast lane environment?
Yeah, well, the banking world in history was notoriously aggressive and target driven and financially driven. And so things would reach boiling point in that pressure and a peer pressure to do better than some of the others, very competitive. But very similar techniques to how Joe described it. How can you take the emotion out of those situations? How can you think clearly under pressure? How can you control the things you can control? How do you prepare? And actually, Joe's absolutely right. One of the best things we can do as coaches is to practice the session, to put yourself in a life-like situation and actually role play what's going to happen, so you get to test it under pressure in a real life situation. So we do that a lot in our business coaching. I think it's a really effective way.
Okay. So my last question, I want to explore the relationship between the coach and top players. What's the essence of success here? What are the key factors that drive it? Joe?
I think trust.
Yeah.
I think trust is so critical. I think understanding that wherever you are on your journey, you're pulling in the same direction and you have similar motivations, you have similar aspirations. And if you lose that and you lose trust in one another, I think the relationship's broken. And I think, for me, I think coaching in the sports world is very much horses for courses. And so I it's no problem if someone needs something from their coach or a coach needs something from their player that isn't there or they can't give it, because I don't think everybody can be everything to all people. But if you start out from the basis of trust and, like I said, rowing in the same direction, pulling in the same direction, you give yourself a chance to build that critical relationship.
Thank you, Joe. Rick?
Yeah, well, it's the magic that makes things work, because you can come well prepared with every possible technique and be well drilled as in what you do as a coach, but unless you can create that rapport, it's just not going to work. And for me, it's all about that deep understanding of each other's perspective, and also being aspirational, stretching the candidate so they really can reach their goals. And that, I think, creates a team driven by each other's success. So it's a privilege to do it. It really is.
Well, it's been my privilege to host this session. I can say, Joe, that we know we're in the real situation. I can occasionally hear the paddles being hit and the ball against the wall. So we're in a live environment.
Sorry about that.
A great contribution from both of you. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm going to give a thank you to both Hannah Nash and Craig Patterson, who sent in supportive comments. And I want to just give advance notice of a paper we've just published on Ambion Leader, on Ambion Leadership, I should say. And indeed, there'll be another LinkedIn Live to discuss the traits of the Ambion Leader on the 1st of May. So I hope you can join us on that session. But for today, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.